Chapter 1, Section 5. When the man looked at him, Sanshiro felt a vague, uncomfortable flush of embarrassment. He thought he might read a book to take his mind off things, so he opened his bag, only to find it stuffed to the top with last night's towels. He shoved the towels aside and dug around at the bottom of the bag, pulling out whatever his hand happened to touch, and out came Bacon's essays, which he couldn't make heads or tails of. It was a flimsy, cheap little pamphlet, almost embarrassingly thin for Bacon. He'd never had any intention of reading it on the train in the first place. It hadn't fit in his big trunk, so he'd tossed it into the bottom of his bag along with 2 or 3 other. It was one of 2 or 3 books he'd tossed into the bottom of his bag without much thought, just to get them out of the way since they wouldn't fit in his big trunk. And unluckily, this was the one he'd pulled out. Sanshiro opened Bacon's essays to page 23. He couldn't have read any other book either. And Bacon, of all things, he had absolutely no desire to read. Still, Sanshiro solemnly opened to page 23 and let his eyes drift carefully across the whole page. Sanshiro sat there in front of page 23, turning the whole thing over in his mind again from the night before. Who was that woman anyway? Could someone like her actually exist in this world? Could a woman really stay that calm and composed like that? Was she just uneducated? Was she bold? Or was she simply innocent? The bottom line was that he hadn't pushed things as far as they could go, so he had no idea what to make of her. He should have been bolder and gone a little further. But that thought alone was terrifying. When they parted, she told him he had no nerve, and that hit him like a jolt. It felt as if 23 years of weakness had been exposed all at once. Not even a parent could have read him so perfectly on the mark. At that thought, Sanshiro felt even more deflated than before. He felt like he'd been put in his place by someone who was nobody, some complete stranger, and he couldn't even hold his head up. He felt genuinely ashamed, like he'd let down page 23 of Bacon's essays. He really needed to stop falling apart like that. So much for being a scholar and a university student. This really says something about his character. He could have handled that so much better. But then again, if she was always going to come at him like that, maybe someone with his upbringing really had no other way to respond, which meant he had no business getting close to women in the first place. That felt pretty spineless and incredibly suffocating. It was as if he'd been born broken somehow. But then, well, Sanshiro suddenly shook off the thought and let his mind drift to a different world entirely. He was headed to Tokyo. He'd enter the university. He'd meet famous scholars. He'd make friends with students of taste and character. He'd do research in the library. He'd write. The world would applaud him. His mother would be overjoyed. He let himself drift lazily through visions of the future like that, one after another. And by the time his spirits had lifted considerably, he no longer felt any particular need to keep his face buried in page 23. So he lifted his head, just like that. And when he did, the man sitting diagonally across from him was looking his way again. This time, Sanshiro looked right back at him. He had a thick, full beard and a long, lean face, with something about him that vaguely resembled a Shinto priest. The one thing that looked Western about him was the straight, clean line of his nose. Sanshiro, still in the middle of his schooling, had a habit of pegging anyone who looked like that as a teacher. The man wore a white kasuri kimono over a neatly layered white juban, with dark blue tabi on his feet. Based on the man's appearance, Sanshiro decided he must be a middle school teacher. Compared to himself, with his whole brilliant future still ahead, the man seemed somehow rather unremarkable. The man looked to be around 40. He probably wasn't going anywhere from here.